The Zirathai marketplace smelled of cold metal, rusted cages, and fear, an odor Lyra had lived with for so long that it had become part of her breathing. Blind since birth, she could not see the shadows slithering around her, but she could feel them. Her antennae picked up every vibration, each carrying the sharp taste of greed, cruelty, or indifference. Tonight, those vibrations trembled with something worse: betrayal. Vorak, her bondmate by arrangement and captor by reality, stood a few paces away negotiating in the guttural tongue of off-world traffickers. Lyra sensed the irregular pulse in his voice, a mixture of desperation and impatience. She did not need eyes to understand that he was selling her. He had never wanted a blind mate, only the small social elevation that came with possessing one. When her inability to perform certain tasks embarrassed him among his peers, he punished her in ways quiet enough for the neighbors not to hear. Lyra had endured it with the silent resignation common to many females in her caste. She had never imagined there could be another path. Tonight, however, the vibrations in the floor told her that her life was about to change, not by choice, but by force. A heavy hand seized her arm, and she flinched despite trying not to. The trafficker's touch was cold, clinical, devoid of even the contempt Vorak used to show. This was the touch of someone handling merchandise, nothing more. Lyra swallowed back a trembling breath as she was guided toward the auction platform. The murmurs around her swelled, each voice a needle of curiosity or hunger. She stood still, spine rigid, antennae curled inward in fearful instinct. If she could have folded herself into nothingness, she would have. One of the traders recited the details of her condition: blind, timid, obedient, low maintenance. A list of traits delivered with the same tone one would use for livestock. Lyra bit the inside of her cheek to keep from reacting. She had learned long ago that emotional expression only invited harsher treatment. But inside, a quiet flame of despair flickered. Even for a Zirathai female, being sold meant losing every remaining scrap of identity. Vorak remained silent behind her, arms crossed. She could feel his annoyance, not guilt. Selling her was simply a way to erase his debts, nothing more. The crowd's attention shifted as bidders from various species began calling out numbers in rough accents. Lyra caught fragments of their intentions: workers, experiments, entertainment. Each possibility felt like a chain tightening around her throat. She did not dare imagine what awaited her. A sudden crackle disrupted the air, followed by a sharp vibration that ran through the metal platform. The auction hall's lighting flickered. Voices grew irritated. Lyra tilted her head, sensing someone different approaching the platform. The emotional tone was unfamiliar, warmer, softer, tinged with concern instead of predation. She could not place it. The footsteps were lighter, uneven in rhythm, and accompanied by the faint hum of human machinery. She had heard of humans, their strange empathy, their unpredictable kindness, but she had never encountered one. The newcomer murmured something to the auctioneer. His voice was low, gentle, but firm in a way Lyra was unaccustomed to. The crowd murmured in annoyance when the bidding suddenly stopped. The auctioneer announced that a new buyer had made a final offer, one far higher than anyone expected for a blind alien female. The room buzzed with outrage, but the transaction was irreversible. Vorak's vibrations spiked in irritation. He had wanted quick money, not a complicated exchange, but the amount offered silenced any objections he might have had. Without ceremony, he turned away. That casual abandonment pierced Lyra harder than any physical strike ever had. She felt herself being guided down the stairs toward the stranger. Every instinct screamed danger, but the emotional aura surrounding him remained warm, unexpectedly steady. When his hand brushed hers, she tensed violently. She prepared for the usual harsh grip, but instead, the contact was feather-light, almost hesitant. He withdrew quickly, as though afraid to startle her further, and spoke in a calm voice shaped by soft consonants. She couldn't decipher the words, but the tone alone soothed her trembling nerves. No one had ever spoken to her like that. He offered his arm instead of taking hers by force. When she hesitated, he waited. Not dragging, not urging, waiting, as though her choice mattered. Lyra did not know how to respond to such unfamiliar gentleness. But the auction hall behind her pulsed with predatory attention, and instinct pushed her forward. She reached out, fingertips brushing the fabric of his sleeve. His heartbeat vibrated through it, steady, strong, unthreatening. As they moved away from the platform, Lyra sensed other vibrations fading behind them, the eyes of the crowd losing interest now that the spectacle had ended. She allowed herself to be led down a quieter corridor, her breathing slowly steadying. Each step away from Vorik, from the cages, from the whispered cruelties, felt unreal. When the door closed behind them and the noise of the market dulled, Lyra exhaled a long, shaky breath. A strange feeling flickered across her chest, something that was not fear, though fear still lingered beneath it. It was the sense that perhaps, just perhaps, her life had not ended tonight. It had shifted, sharply, violently, but not necessarily toward something worse. She stood still, feeling the gentle presence beside her. This human had bought her, but for reasons she could not understand. Her entire life had taught her that ownership meant pain. And yet, everything about him contradicted that expectation. She did not know his name, his intentions, or his world. But she knew one truth with startling clarity. The vibrations around him carried no cruelty. For the first time in years, Lyra felt a fragile spark, something like hope, but too new to trust. She turned her head toward him, antennae trembling as she sensed a steady calm. Whatever came next, the darkness she had known all her life no longer felt so suffocating. The stranger's presence had carved a small opening in it, a sliver of possibility she did not dare to name. The Emperor had not expected the change, and certainly not so quickly. When word reached him that the beast, his symbol of absolute domination, had bowed its head in the presence of a human single father, he dismissed it as exaggerated gossip. But when he entered the containment hall himself and saw the creature sitting unnaturally still, its breathing slow and its gaze fixed toward the corridor where the human usually walked, a pulse of irritation tightened beneath his ribs. The Emperor prided himself on knowing every weakness of his empire, every potential threat, and every fragile link in the chain of fear he used to rule. Yet this softness, this inexplicable shift in the creature's behavior, he had not foreseen it. And he despised what he could not predict. The human father, unaware of the political storm gathering above him, returned to work the next day with the simple goal of earning enough credits to support his children. But the guards watched him differently now. Their conversations fell silent when he approached. Some looked at him with awe, others with suspicion, a few with fear. He ignored all of it. Attention was irrelevant. Stability for his children was everything. Yet as he walked past the containment chamber once more, he felt the air shift. The beast stirred, not with aggression, but with a strange recognition. A rumbling sound vibrated from its chest, low and questioning, almost like a wounded animal uncertain whether to trust a healing hand.
He paused.
Not because he intended to interact with it, but because something in its posture resembled the silent tremors his youngest child had during nightmares. Slowly, he extended his hand, not close enough to touch, just close enough to show he wasn't afraid. The beast leaned forward, nostrils flaring, as if memorizing his scent. The guards panicked, readying weapons, but the human lifted a hand for silence. And for reasons none of them could explain, the creature obeyed. It lowered itself to the ground, muscles tightening as if bracing against instinct, and allowed the moment to stretch into an impossible quiet. This subtle bond did not go unnoticed. Within hours, high-ranking officials convened emergency meetings in dim-lit rooms, voices sharp with unease. Some argued the human should be eliminated before he disrupted the fragile balance of authority. Others believed he could be exploited, trained to control the beast for military advantage. But the Emperor remained silent through it all, his fingers tapping against the obsidian edge of his throne. The idea that any being could succeed where he had failed gnawed at him. His empire had been built on the certainty that no one surpassed his dominance. The beast bowing to a human threatened the entire performance of power he had cultivated. Meanwhile, the human's children unknowingly entered the unfolding conflict. When he returned home that evening, they complained about imperial officers lingering near their residence, asking questions, watching their movements. He felt a familiar protective fire rise in his chest, a reflex sharpened by years of single parenthood. The empire might have been vast and merciless, but his children were his entire universe. If their peace was threatened, he would not remain passive. The next morning, he brought them to the Imperial Learning Center, hoping they would be safer in a more public environment. Yet even there, he saw the subtle shifts, the way alien parents pulled their young closer, the way instructors whispered while glancing at him. Rumors had spread far beyond the palace. Whispers of the human who touched the untouchable rippled through markets, corridors, and transport hubs. Curiosity turned into fascination. Fascination turned into fear. And fear, he knew, was always the first spark of conflict. The beast, however, reacted differently. As days passed, it began pacing restlessly when he was late, snapping at guards who attempted to get close, snarling at the Emperor's handlers. Its aggression grew not from mindless rage, but from a newfound awareness, a need for the one presence that had shown it calm instead of commands. It was not loyalty, it was not affection. It was recognition of a language it had never been taught: gentleness. This behavioral change created a problem so profound it fractured the Emperor's confidence. For if a human could calm the creature, then the Emperor could lose his most potent symbol of fear. And worse, his subjects might begin to believe that the beast responded not to brutality, but to compassion. Such an idea, if allowed to spread, could unravel the entire system he had built. Determined to reassert control, the Emperor ordered a controlled demonstration. He demanded the human be brought to the main arena, supposedly for a harmless observation, while the beast was released under the assumption that the human's presence would restrain it. But the human sensed the manipulation immediately. The arena was enclosed, the doors locked, guards positioned in lethal formation. His children were nowhere in sight, which told him everything he needed to know about the Emperor's intentions. The beast emerged through the far gate, chains dragging, eyes blazing with confusion. It smelled fear, metal, electrified air, and him. Instantly, its posture changed. It lowered its shoulders, exhaled, and began walking toward him instead of the guards shouting for it to halt. A murmur swept through the arena. Even the Emperor leaned forward, jaw tight, watching the creature abandon every instinct it had been conditioned to obey. But the moment of connection lasted only a heartbeat. At the Emperor's command, shock lances fired, striking the beast's flank. It roared in betrayal, staggering back, torn between instinct and trust. The human stepped forward without thinking, shouting for them to stop as arcs of blue electricity lit the air. The second section closes as the arena trembles with conflict between control and compassion, dominance and defiance, while the Emperor realizes with growing dread that his greatest weapon may no longer belong to him. Chaos exploded through the arena the moment the shock lances struck again. The beast's roar shook dust from the steel rafters, a wounded cry that carried not only pain but something far more dangerous: betrayal. It reared back on powerful limbs, muscles bunching beneath scarred hide, and for the first time in its existence, its fury was not directionless. It knew exactly where the pain was coming from. The Emperor's guards, realizing their miscalculation too late, scrambled to adjust their formation as the creature lunged with a speed no one had ever witnessed outside of battlefields. But even in its fury, the beast hesitated when its wild gaze locked onto the human father. The man stood at the center of the arena, breathing hard, hands raised not in fear but in an instinctive plea for calm, the same gesture he used when one of his children woke from a nightmare. He shouted at the guards to stop, his voice cracking against the crackle of energy shields and panicked orders. The beast faltered, torn between instinctive retaliation and the faint thread of trust it had begun to build. That hesitation saved lives, but it also forced the Emperor to confront a truth he had long denied. The creature was no longer his. Infuriated, the Emperor stood from his elevated throne platform and signaled for the elite suppression unit. Their armor gleamed black under the arena lights, each suit equipped with high-frequency emitters designed specifically to break the beast's nervous system. This was not discipline, it was torture weaponized. The Emperor's face remained cold, but the tightness around his mouth betrayed the fury beneath his calm. He would not allow a human, especially a soft, quiet, unremarkable father, to undermine his control. The human understood what was about to happen. He stepped backward, not out of fear for himself, but because he needed a better vantage to reach the creature. The first emitter blast struck the beast like a hammer through bone. It collapsed to one knee, claws digging trenches into the metal floor, jaw clenched in silent agony. And yet, even as every nerve in its body screamed, it dragged its eyes back to the human, as if searching for an anchor in the storm ripping through it. Something inside the man broke at that sight. All his life, he had shielded his children from cruelty, from the consequences of adults who used power without compassion. He recognized the beast suffering the same way he recognized fear in his children's trembling hands. Without thinking, he ran forward, dodging guards and sliding across the scorched floor until he was within reach. He pressed his palm against the side of the creature's neck, right where the hide was warmest. The beast froze. For a single moment, the pain lessened, not because the emitters weakened, but because the creature focused everything it had on that touch. The arena fell silent. Even the Emperor leaned forward, confusion replacing arrogance for half a breath. Then something impossible happened. The beast moved, not with rage, not with violence, but with intent. With its remaining strength, it shifted its massive body around the human, shielding him from the suppression unit. Soldiers shouted in alarm. Emitters fired again, striking the beast's back. Its roar tore through the arena, but it did not move aside. It protected him as if the instinct had always been there, buried beneath centuries of conditioning. The human father lifted both arms, shouting at the soldiers to stop, voice raw with fury he hadn't felt since the day his children were nearly taken from him on a lawless outpost. His heart pounded, but there was no fear, only resolve. He stepped in front of the beast, blocking their line of fire, daring them to hit him instead. The suppression unit hesitated. Killing a human civilian, especially one involved in a phenomenon the Emperor clearly hadn't anticipated, carried consequences. That hesitation gave the beast the moment it needed. It swung its tail in a wide arc, knocking several soldiers across the arena. Sparks flew as armor scraped against metal. Shouts erupted. The Emperor slammed his fist against the railing, ordering them to regain control, but the tide had already shifted. The beast lowered itself beside the human, wounded but alert, rumbling with a low, protective growl. For the first time in the Empire's history, it was acting of its own free will, not as a weapon, not as a prisoner, but as a living creature choosing whom it trusted. That choice struck a nerve across the entire arena. Some guards dropped their weapons, recognizing something sacred in the gesture. Others tightened their grip, uncertain whether they were witnessing the birth of a threat or the unraveling of the Emperor's myth of dominance. The suppression unit regrouped, forming a perimeter, but none dared to fire again. The Emperor saw all of it, the hesitation, the fear, the shifting loyalties, and understood the danger more clearly than anyone. If a human could tame the creature, then all his talk of absolute power meant nothing. He could not allow this connection to continue. The bond between the human father and the beast threatened not just his authority, but the very foundation of the Empire's fear-based rule. He signaled for the doors to close, sealing the arena. The human turned, confusion flickering across his face as the massive gates clanged shut. The beast stiffened, sensing the trap before the man fully understood it. From the darkened tunnels above, new machinery hummed to life. Heavy, industrial, lethal. The Emperor's voice echoed across the arena, amplified and cold. If the creature refuses obedience, then both of you will be erased. The third section ends with the arena sealed, the Emperor preparing something catastrophic, and the beast and the human father standing together for the first time, united in defiance, bound by instinct, and moments away from a confrontation that could reshape the entire empire.